Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today we're incredibly fortunate to be joined by the fantastically talented Hunter Doohan, who is currently starring in the Showtime series Your Honor. And you're starring alongside Bryan Cranston playing his son. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about your initial screen test with him, because I know that when you came to New York, you went to go see him when he was currently starring in Network on Broadway. And we're a huge fan of his work already. But I was interested in, from that experience of sitting in the theater and watching him work, what you really gleaned from the way that he works as a performer that you then carried with you into that screen test with him the next day.
I carried a whole bunch of nerves with me into the screen test the next day. Yeah, I mean, good on you, that research that that I did that. I was like, I'm not going to waste this opportunity because, I was like, I might not get the show, but I was such a huge fan of his. So I was like, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to buy this ticket and go see him, and just then I'll think of it as a way to act with him, have an opportunity. And then it was kind of a mistake though, in the way that I like looked up so much, and then I was like literally looking up at him, and then the next morning had to go into the audition. So I was really nervous, but thankfully Brian's amazing, and we got to chat outside for a few minutes before we actually went in and did the audition. And then, I mean, in the test, he just gave me so much. He like went for it. I was used to like doing the self tape in my apartment with friends from my acting class, or casting associates and other rounds, and then all of a sudden you have Bryan Cranston who's like yelling at you, and he had a line like, "Look at me, Adam," and he grabbed me by the face. And so yeah, I totally credit him with giving me my performance.
That's amazing. And then once you landed the role, I know that you were working very closely with Peter Moffat, who created and is the show and is also the showrunner, to kind of really flesh out a lot of the details with Adam. And there was something that I loved in the way you described that collaboration, that like you really came to the table with a lot of ideas and then he helped you to fill in the gaps. And so wanted to ask about what were those details that you really kind of filled in the middle together in the conversations that you had based on the foundation that you had built to really evolve who he is as a character and make him so multi-layered.
I mean, honestly, I gotta sing Peter's praises. The scripts are so good and they're so detailed. I mean, they're very like actor friendly. He does a lot of action lines, and like the crash scene, for example, that was like, 3 pages of just action lines. And, you go through and do your work, and you're like, writing out your thoughts and actions and all those boring actor terms. And sometimes I'd be like, oh, that's good. I like that a lot. And then I'd go back to the script and be like, oh, Peter came up with this. Uh, but yeah, he was great. I mainly went to him with questions and to get help. I didn't, I feel like I can't take any credit for building Adam. Peter did so much, and I just felt fortunate to get to play him.
Yeah. And you were mentioning that opening crash scene, which is just such an introduction to the story and really kind of sets the tone of just tension and anxiety, and really gives you such a concept of what the entire show is going to be faceted around. And so was interested in the way that you really constructed those scenes, and particularly because it's such a unique challenge in terms of those scenes, because there's no dialogue most of the
Right.
time. It's very much like an internal journey, but you're also juxtaposing the physical side and the internal side of what he's going through in your performance. So I was interested in how you looked at both of those two facets and really pulled them together into the performance that you gave in that opening scene.
Yeah, I mean that was definitely, the hardest part of the show, is that, the first 30 minutes of the pilot, Adam basically has no dialogue, but there's so much action and so many events happening, and he's making so many decisions that basically set up the rest of the series. So, I just really wanted to focus on every little moment and make sure that you could track, exactly what Adam was thinking, and every decision he makes, even when it's the wrong one and it makes you want to scream at your TV, what are you doing? But I also got to work with Edward Berger, our director for the first three, and we would just sit down, and sometimes he would show me like the storyboards, or we would just say like, moment by moment, what are we doing here? Because he wanted to make it as clear as possible too. And again, Peter Moffat, that scene, it was just like every moment that happens, like when I would get to Rocco and I feel his wrist and his neck, and then he's about to say something and leaning down and then using my fingers, like all of those are in the script. And we spent like 3 days shooting that whole sequence.
Yeah. And your character is also going through the midst of an asthma attack in that moment, which really adds the anxiety. And I thought that the performance that you gave in that realm was really stunning to watch, just in terms of the
Thank
breath
you.
work that you bring to that. And I noticed as well, there's moments throughout the series where you really kind of like carry that idea of like breath work through in moments where he struggles to breathe, and oxygen's kind of like always a little bit of a grasp away for him as a character. And I know that part of your research was meeting with a pulmonologist. So how did kind of like the research really feed into a lot of the choices that you made in terms of what you were doing with your breath and with your voice in, especially in those opening sequences?
I mean, it just informed everything.
Mm-hmm.
I just, was desperately wanted to play that as authentically as I could. And it's such a huge, important part of Adam. And so I met with the pulmonologist here in LA, and also a few people that have asthma, and just tried to make sure I was, getting the wheezing sound right, and the feeling that you get in your chest when it first starts, and maybe some tactics that some friends might have that have asthma, like when it starts to come on, like what do you do, what do you feel like, and what happens when you use your inhaler, everything like that. And I just tried to latch on to anything like that I could research, because it just gives you a nice foundation and something to fall back on. And the same with, I got to talk to 2 psychiatrists about
Mm-hmm.
the PTSD, and reference this book, The Body Keeps Score, because, after the crash, just everything in Adam's life changes. And we get to see that, especially in episode 2, he has a, PTSD flashback where he,
Mm-hmm.
his dad is questioning him and making him think about the crash when he doesn't want to. It just, he feels like he's right back there. So, all of those, I just really wanted to get right as I could.
Yeah. And with those details of PTSD, it feels like there's so many tiny details that you pull into it. Like even the moment where he's just, he remembers the t-shirt that Rocco was wearing, and you just think about how these details are all playing out throughout his mind the whole time. What were some of the details like that really kind of pulled into your character and into your performance from those conversations that you had as part of your research?
I think one of the most helpful things was when I learned about this kind of psychological phenomenon called the compulsion to repeat,
Mm-hmm.
which to me, it's kind of like if you go through something super traumatic, it's like you keep putting yourself back in that situation. And to me, that justified a lot of what Adam does, especially, like in episode 3, when he's going around and taking the photos of the crime scene and the prison and shoes that have had the blood on them. It helped me like just get into his head and why somebody would do that, which I know sometimes can be frustrating. My brother texted me in that episode and was like, I'm 12 minutes in, could you be more of a dumbass?
It's a valid question for him to
Yeah,
ask, but
yeah.
I feel
I was
like
like, I get it.
it works with the story of the way it's played out. And you're just mentioning the photography, and that's such an integral part to who he is as well. And I thought it was interesting that he does seem to be a very internalized character even before we meet him on screen. When we get those details about the way that he connects with photography, the fact that he's someone who spends a lot of time in the library, like he's not necessarily someone who's very extroverted. So did you kind of look at details like that in terms of like building a foundation of who he was beforehand, and then figuring out how that would influence a lot of the experience that he's going through with this PTSD at the same time?
Yeah, 100%. Even before I officially got in the role, when I was still testing for it, I went and took a class here in LA privately at this place called the School of Light, and learned how to shoot on film and then develop in a dark room, and just to kind of feel like I could, had the truth of like really knowing what I was doing in those scenes. But I thought it was really interesting when I spent all that time in the dark room. You're alone and maybe you're listening to music, but you have so much time to think. And that just gave me a real insight into who Adam was. And photography is also tied to his mom, and then when he loses her, it just starts to mean even more. And then that influences his relationship with Franny, and she kind of steps into that role a little bit in a not creepy way, but I think she reminds him of his mom, and then that fills that hole in his heart basically.
Yeah. Did you think about the details of photography that his mom would have taught him, and how his own style as a photographer would have been really influenced and impacted by her?
Yeah, because there's a lot of talk in the script about, she's a street photographer and a photojournalist. And, it was really fun to have these scripts so early on, because I started getting the scripts after I booked it in the summer, and we didn't go until September of 2019 to shoot. And so I got to see several drafts of them. And, sometimes stuff makes it into a script and then gets cut and doesn't make it on screen, but I still got that information for me to know and play off of. And, I got to read, what kind of photographer was. She was a photojournalist, and, that's why she was in that part of town. And maybe she was doing some dangerous work and photographing stuff she shouldn't be, or people felt like she shouldn't be, and maybe that played into her death. So all of that just helps, it's just, again, just adding little layers.
And how much did you and Bryan Cranston have conversations about what that family dynamic would have been prior to them losing her? Because, there's a really unique aspect to the relationship that they have as a father and son, with the fact that they have been dealing with this shared grief over the last year, but a lot of that's impacted by what comes across as like a real closeness to her.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about that, and what our relationship has been in the year following. To me, it always kind of felt like they hadn't really dealt with her death, and you know hadn't really don't really talk about it a lot. There was a couple of scenes like that that also didn't make the final scripts, or make it onto screen. Even some that we shot, that was like, talking about how we just haven't dealt with it. We're not talking about it. And I think Adam is taking it a lot harder and feels like not enough has been done. And that was part of what I loved about Adam is, he has the best of intentions. Like even in the first episode, when he's going to set up that memorial, it's because for his mom, he feels like not enough has been done to honor her or figure out what happened to her. And I think he always has those good intentions and wants to try to do the right thing. And then he's also 17 and sometimes messes it up. And sometimes his actions or inactions kind of make it hard to love him too.
Yeah. I think it's interesting what you were just saying about how feeling like Adam and his dad haven't really actually talked about it and had those conversations, because as a juxtaposition to the fact that they're not talking about it, there's a real intimacy that comes across in the relationship that you crafted together. Even looking at that early scene where Adam's telling his dad about the crash and what happened, and the way that Bryan Cranston kind of like physically almost like cradles your face and has his hands like on your face and on your neck, and their faces are kind of very interconnected with each other. And he's just like, I'm here for you. I will support you. So how did the two of you come up with like the intimacy of that dynamic between the two of them as a father and son?
We just tried to spend as much time together before we got on set as possible. When we like first got down to New Orleans, we would, have dinner together, and we watched Shawshank one night, which is something that the characters do too. And then yeah, just talking about it and then rehearsing. And anytime that I was worried about a scene, Bryan would be gracious enough to rehearse with me outside of set. We did that, with that PTSD attack in episode 2, and we also did it with our big fight scene in episode 4. And I think a big part of it, is like you said, there's such a physicality there, and that's just the kind of relationship that they have. And I think it was just about getting comfortable with one another, and especially on my end, to make sure I wasn't still like fanboying over him by the time we got to set.
You're like, now I'm actually really mad at you instead.
Yeah, I'm mad. I don't think you're cool. I'm not a Breaking Bad fan. I'm pissed at you. Go.
And then I also was really, I thought that his home dynamic was really interesting, even beyond the relationship with his dad, because we see so many of his dad's colleagues come into his world. And, I think it's episode 5 or 6, there's a dinner scene where a lot of his dad's colleagues are at the table. And it's clear every time that any of them enter the house that his dad's work life has really flowed into the home for both of them. And that Adam has spent a lot of his time, not just around his dad being part of you know, the world of law and politics, but that's something that really kind of literally and figuratively sits at his dinner table most nights of the week. And to your point about, you know, he's a 17-year-old boy, so sometimes he makes terrible choices. I was interested in how you also thought about the maturity that would bring him, and these two different sides of like who he is with his peers versus who he is at the dinner table when he's sitting there with his dad's colleagues, because it's a totally different demeanor.
Yeah, one of the things we talked about a lot was that, you know, Adam is right on the cusp of between boy and man. And so it's interesting you picked up on those things. Like there's sometimes where he, you know, is not thinking things through enough and making, you know, these terrible decisions out of, you know, sometimes like when he tells Franny, it's, you know, all about just needing somebody in the way that, you know, not even a 17-year-old, but anybody going through this would. And then also when you lose someone at such a young age, you are forced to kind of mature really quickly. And, you know, I felt like at the beginning of the show, I had a really good insight onto where Adam was emotionally, because, you know, again, it's the year anniversary of his mom's death and we're starting. And when we were shooting, we were actually I had just passed the 2-year mark of losing my dad. And so it just gave me, again, something to latch onto and be like, okay, I know this feeling. I know what it's like to lose somebody and what that does to you and how it makes you mature. And I know when I lost my dad and like his friends and my mom and the people that the adults that know that and would surround you and help you. And I think there's a lot of that, you know, like with Isaiah, who plays Charlie, coming in and he plays the Godfather, and Adam and him clearly have like a close relationship. I'd call him Uncle Charlie in the show.
Yeah.
And same with like Amy Landecker. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're so beautiful. And I'm so sorry that you experienced that loss. Were there also ways in which you really thought about the really internal experience and the things that people don't say out loud when they're going through grief, and ways that you could kind of quietly pull that into Adam and some of the more kind of like quiet moments that aren't necessarily kind of like fully dialogue driven, where it's just seeing him on screen for a moment and thinking about the way that would still be sitting with him even when we're not talking about it?
Yeah, one of the things I talked to the psychiatrist about is kind of linking trauma together. Because I think because the crash happened on his way or on the way home from, you know, visiting his mom's death site, that is all linked. And then that's linked to Rocco, and then Rocco gets linked to what happens to Kofi, and it's all just weighing on Adam and crushing him. And, you know, I felt very fortunate that, you know, he's a teenage character, but he's not treated like a normal teenage character in, you know, than the usual like drama shows, or they're just there to annoy their parents. You know, Adam is like fully fleshed out, and we get to see those private moments, which is so fun and like a gift as an actor. Like the dance sequence in episode 3 that we get to like see Adam just, you know, he's again just being crushed. He feels like he has 1,000,000 pounds of pressure on him, and then to get to see him like totally alone, not putting on any fake faces for anybody, and then to see this like physical representation of everything that he's feeling, and then to cut back to him kind of just standing there and realizing he's just barely keeping a lid on everything going on inside his head.
Yeah. There's also the fact as well that beyond everything that he's going through with the car crash, that he's going through having to completely deconstruct the idea of who he thought his dad was. You know, their relationship dynamic completely shifts because of this. And, you know, I think during that scene where they're having the argument outside of the house, where, you know, he's trying to push his dad to actually just say what really happened out loud, and his dad still won't do it, so he can't turn to him. How did you kind of play the idea of like looking at a parental figure that he's so close to being completely disconfigured right in front of his eyes, and the impact that would have as it kind of creates less and less people that he can try and talk to about this?
Again, that was another big idea. That was something, you know, Peter had talked about from the very beginning, is the arc between Michael and Adam. And, you know, they're still grieving, but then in the pilot, they're forced to come together, and it's a real, I think, beautiful moment that they have, and they're really there for each other. But then my favorite parts of the show, where I think it's really interesting, are when Michael or Brian's character takes it maybe too far, or definitely too far, and he's doing what he knows he has to do to protect his son, but for Adam dealing with that guilt, he can't deal with it, and he needs somebody to talk to. And there used to be a scene where Brian said, the less we talk about it, the less we'll think about it, and it'll be like it never happened. And Adam is just not able to do that. And yeah, like you said, he loses these people they can talk to, because, and then in episode 4, when Kofi dies and Michael tells Adam he won't give him any details, and he just says, it's not our fault, don't worry about it. And so Adam tries that. He kind of shuts down around his dad until he blows up at the end. But then he also goes to school and tries to talk to Franny, and he just told her everything at the end of the last episode, and then she kind of mirrors what Brian had just said, and she's like, you got to be careful, there's some truths worth lying for. And that just crushes out. I'm like, here's the one person I thought I could go to besides my dad, and now I don't have anybody. And I think that leads him kind of into the Fia storyline.
Right. It's so fascinating that they included that storyline. And like you said, that he kind of goes through this experience of everyone else shutting down, which really makes it a rational decision as to why he would then be talking to her, even though he can't explicitly say it out loud. How did the two of you work together in terms of crafting the idea that they have this shared history and this shared experience, and that, they both really understand grief and loss, even if they're not kind of able to have that central conversation that he kind of really needs to have?
Well, we work together great. I love Lily, who plays Thea. She became just one of my best friends. We actually had to stop shooting in March because of COVID, and we went back around October and November of 2020 to finish up. And Lily and I actually roomed together, because we would have to go to set and then just straight back to where we were living, because we couldn't go out and experience New Orleans, and that was sad. And you couldn't hang out with the crew or talk to anybody like you used to be able to. But it was fun to then be able to go back to our apartment and hang out, and we had our own little NOLA bar in our apartment. But like you said, I mean, that is just in the scripts. It's so beautifully written that they do have this shared trauma, and it's what connects them. And I don't think Adam intentionally set out to have a romantic involvement at all. I think he was obsessed with Rocco, and we see that in episode 2 when he's Googling and he ends up on Rocco's Facebook, and it's like, oh no, don't do this to yourself. And then he wants to go to the memorial, and then he meets her there, and then they meet at the coffee shop, and they do just discover they get each other. And part of this their relationship that Lily and I crafted and talked about was, because of that, they also have this lightness about them, because we're not being weird around each other because of the loss, like everybody else in each other's lives are being. And they're able to have this fun and just breath of fresh air, which is like the only time we see that for either of the characters. And I used to laugh, like Adam's smiling in the very first scene of the show, and then we kind of don't see him smile again until episode 5, when he sits down with Fia at the coffee shop.
Yeah. What was that experience like in terms of having to shut down production and then coming back? Did you have much of an opportunity to, even look at any of the dailies, or what was that process of just like regrouping and refinding the character, but also looking at the work that you had done and what you wanted to continue evolving with your performance?
I didn't see anything. I think the trailer had come out by the time we went back, but no, I wasn't like asking to see the dailies or anything. But it was sad. It was weird to go back, because like I said, we had so much fun. The crew on the show was amazing. I think because New Orleans is like a smaller film community than out in LA, and they've all like worked together a bunch, and so they're all friends, and it was just really fun to jump in and be a part of that community. So to go back, and then obviously people have their masks on, but actors have these cones basically of a shield that went in, and like came up like a cone, like a dog would have after the vet. And it just made it to where we couldn't sit around and talk, we couldn't eat lunch together. You had to like take your lunch back to your trailer, or people would go out and find a spot to sit alone outside. So yeah, it was just honestly not as much fun, and it didn't have that sense of camaraderie that we'd had. And obviously, we wanted to do everything we could to keep everybody
Yeah.
safe, but
Yeah. Separately, I also love that when you were starting out your career, that you created a lot of content and opportunities for yourself when you weren't yet landing, jobs like this in the industry, in terms of like writing, producing, and directing a lot of short films. And you've said how, at one point your acting reel was completely full of projects that you created for yourself. But I think
yeah.
it's such a wonderful thing to be that proactive, and also to have that opportunity to just play so freely in terms of the types of performances that you decided to do. And no one's limiting the characters you play when you're creating them for yourself. So what were the most valuable tools that you feel that you really got the opportunity to develop and hone through that experience of just kind of like playing, but playing professionally?
Well, saying it was professional is very kind. Uh, yeah, me and my friends we made shorts, and we did them for no money, but like you said, it was to have footage for our reels to hopefully get auditions so we could go out for anything. And I learned so much. You learn a ton just by watching yourself,
Yeah.
and like, oh, I thought I was doing this, but that didn't come across at all. And yeah, I learned so much from that, and I'm really thankful for it. And it also made me realize I love that side of it, and I love writing and directing, and it's something I'm gonna continue to try to do.
Yeah. And you also did a lot of background acting over several years as well, which can be such a great opportunity to really just watch and learn from everything that's going around you. So similarly, what were the things that you feel like you got the opportunity to just sit back and watch and learn from all of those years of background acting as well?
I moved out to LA from Arkansas, so
Mhm.
I didn't know anything. I didn't understand how any of it worked. So yeah, I was like amazed when I found out that background acting was like a job you could do. I was like, oh, what a great day job, because I've had all the actor jobs. I was like a terrible waiter, and I was a tour guide at Universal Studios. So just to be on set was really fun, and I did it for several years. I think 5, and until I got fired. I got fired from, and it wasn't my fault. There was several times where I should have been fired for ditching to go on auditions and just happened to not get caught. But the last time, I swear they got me mixed up with somebody else. They told me I had told them I was late because I got in a car crash, and I was like, but I didn't get in a car crash and I wasn't late. And they're like, well, sorry, we don't take any excuses. I was like, what?
You're like, I didn't even tell you that I was in a car crash. Who
Yeah,
was
I was
it?
like, my car's right there. It's fine.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day today to talk to us all about the show, and congratulations on everything. It's been such a joy to watch your performance in it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you for talking to me about it. I again feel so lucky to be part of it. So I love to talk about it any chance I get.